Okay, awesome, awesome. All right, so where we're going to pick up is on page 89, and it's going to be chapter 7, working with others. And what's really exciting about where we're at in the book is like, this is where, I don't know about you guys, but for me, this is where the magic really began to happen. And this is where the program really began to truly come alive for me. And so chapter 7, working with others, is pretty well entirely devoted to step 12. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get into step 12 and how do we work with others. And last week, and welcome to those that have just joined, I'm glad you're here. So one of the things is, last week we were talking about step 11, and we're kind of talking about those old ideas that I have to let go of with prayer and meditation, right? That idea that an example is that meditation is sitting in perfect stillness and I can't meditate my mind. That's an old idea. I've got to seek a new experience. And I came, with some old ideas about sponsorship. I don't know about you guys. Some of my old ideas was like, sponsorship was for the keeners, the big nerds. And some of you know that I am a big nerd, and that is who I have become, but it's not just for the big nerds. One of the things that I thought was that not everyone was supposed to be a sponsor, or that somebody like me couldn't be a sponsor, or that I didn't have anything to offer. One of the old ideas that I had was that I was going to make it worse. I was going to show up to my sponsees and somehow I was going to make it worse. And I have the privilege of working with a lot of, just a variety of different people. I love working with brand new newcomers. I love working with chronic relapsers. I love working with people who are seeking a new experience and have been stale for a little while. And a group of people that I get to work with as well is people who have been through the steps, but they're not sure how to work with others. And I love that, because this is going to give us directions on how to do that. And truly, we are specifically made and created to work with others. We get to help in a way that no other people can. And it is incredible. And if you didn't believe me that it was incredible, well, what we're going to start on page 89 is with some promises. Like, we're gonna pack a punch here. So working with others, starting with promises. And these promises are genuinely powerful. So much so that my home group, we actually read them at the end of the meeting instead of a vision for you or some of the other readings. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but we read these. And I think it's just so clear the power of step 12. And so it says, practical experience shows that nothing will so much as ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. And just to break down that sentence, practical experience. And what that means is our practical experience has demonstrated. It's not a bunch of like drunks sitting in an ivory, or scientists sitting in an ivory tower thinking, here's what those drunks and addicts ought to be doing. It is our experience has demonstrated. And this is a practical suggestion. It's not something that is airy or doesn't have any weight. This is something that practically works. And what I have come to find is I need that immunity from drinking, immunity from the first drink, the first drug, the first hit, the first toot. I need immunity from that. And how do I ensure immunity? Intensive work with others. Intensive work. And I always emphasize intensive. With my sponsees, is I really emphasize, if it's not inconvenient, I probably don't have enough sponsees. It is meant to be inconvenient, intensive work. So again, if I want immunity, I need to be intensively carrying this message, intensively in sponsorship, working with others. And it says it works when other activities fail. And that's what we saw in Bill's story. See, in Bill's story, on one side of the page, he has a profound spiritual awakening. He had a luminous spiritual experience. The white light shone upon him. He felt as though he was lifted up on a mountaintop and the clean wind is blowing through and through. On the very next page, right across the page, It says, I was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink. But work with another alcoholic would always save the day. And that's, welcome guys. We're on page 89 for those that just joined us. We're in Working with Others, chapter 7. And so that idea that this works, when nothing else is working, this is a suggestion that practically works. And it says, carry this message to other alcoholics. And it's got an exclamation mark. We don't see exclamation marks quite a bit there, but it's got an exclamation mark. Carry this message. And what is the message? Well, that message is that a spiritual experience is sufficient to overcome alcoholism. And these 12 steps are the actions that any human being can take to have a spiritual experience. That is the message we are carrying. It says you can help when no one else can. You can secure their confidence when others fail. Remember, they are very ill. This is where my life is given meaning and purpose. The worst things about who I am, the worst things that I have ever done, man, I can help others. When I'm sitting down with a newcomer and they are filled with guilt and shame and remorse, and they're in a situation that, that we get ourselves into with that physical allergy. And I can say, yes, me too. And here's what happened to me. And here's how I got freedom from it. That is powerful. And when it says, remember, they are very ill, remember, we are dealing with people who are not bad, like ourselves, who are not bad, who are not of weak moral character, who are ill, unwell. I'm up against an illness over which I could not possibly have any power. Ill. And so when we're dealing with people who are in pain, they are going to act from a place of pain. So remember, they are coming from pain. Remember, they are hurting. Remember, they are ill. It says, life will take on new meaning. New meaning. Man, I don't know about you, but by the time I got here, my life was filled with futility and hopelessness. And what's the point? But sitting down and working with others truly has given my life new meaning. It says to watch people recover. Recover. They too can recover. Recover does not mean cured, but recover does mean the mental obsession has been lifted. To watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. We know you will not want to miss it. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot of our lives. Man, if you would have told me that hanging out on Zoom, with a bunch of people who are looking for a spiritual solution would genuinely be the bright spot of my life when I got here, I'd be like, one, what is Zoom? Because it didn't exist. But two, I wouldn't have believed you. I wouldn't have believed you that hanging out with others. I wouldn't have believed you that sitting down with a newly sober drunk or newly clean addict with this book and my experience would give me joy, meaning, purpose, direction. Man, I wouldn't have believed you. And I just want to speak about to watch loneliness vanish. And the reason I just want to speak about that is, on page 1 in Bill's story, he talks about at the end of the very first paragraph, I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. And when we get to a vision for you, we're going to see where it talks about that loneliness, like that is this mist that thickens and it comes upon us. And see, I don't know about you guys, but for me, loneliness had absolutely nothing to do with physical proximity to another human being or a fuzzy little friend who likes to come and hang out during the big book study, right? It had nothing to do with that because I could feel absolutely alone and lonely in a stadium full of others. I could feel alone and lonely in a room full of people. I could feel lonely and alone in the middle of a relationship, and I could feel absolutely alone in the middle of an act of intimacy. So for somebody like me, loneliness doesn't have to do with proximity to others. It has everything to do with a sense of separateness from God. And in the step 5 promises, it talks about how we can be alone at perfect peace and ease. And the reason is because I'm beginning to experience that presence, which is God. But in these step 12 promises, and just wait, there's more step 12 promises. There's so many more. Like, there are promises all over this thing. But in these promises, that loneliness that other people are experiencing, that pain, that hopelessness, that emptiness in the depth of their soul, that we get to be a small part of their miracle, and that being relieved for them. That for me has been absolutely incredible. And yeah, this truly, genuinely is the bright spot of my life. And I genuinely wouldn't have it any other way. And so this next paragraph, what we're going to read is, where do I find people to work with? Where am I going to find these people to sponsor, to take through the steps to carry this message? Where am I going to find them? It's important to remember that this book was published in 1939, and it was meant to succinctly carry this message. And I might be alone in the world with this book. I might be alone in Calgary, Alberta, and not have a fellowship, and only have this book, not have a sponsor, just this book, and have to go find people to work with. So it's got to give me directions on where I can find them. So it says, perhaps you are not acquainted with any drinkers who wish to recover. You can easily find some by asking a few doctors, ministers, priests, or hospitals. They will be only too glad to assist you. And so I want to point out that that is pre-AA, pre-CA, pre-DAA, pre-12 step. So where would I go today if I needed a sponsee and I needed somebody to work with? Where would I find them? Well, just practically, the best place to find alcoholics or addicts who wish to recover is a meeting. That's the best place, because they're at a meeting. They might not know, they might not be willing, but they're at least open enough to be at a meeting. So it is important that I regularly attend meetings, because I have yet to have the, still suffering alcoholic wander into the basement, asking for help. I've got to go and find, and I've got to seek. But it also tells us where our respective fellowships need to do public information work. So we need to be doing that work in PI, public information, H&I, hospitals and institutions, reaching out to doctors, reaching out to ministers, various churches, reaching out to priests or hospitals or treatment centers or detoxes. And so it's interesting that as we talk about step 12, we're also going to talk a little bit about service and some of the places in which our service bodies need to be to help carry this message, to let people know, hey, we are here and we have a solution if you want it. So it says, don't start out as an evangelist or reformer. Unfortunately, a lot of prejudice exists. You will be handicapped if you arouse it. And so one of the things is, the book was written again in 1939, or published in 1939, really written in 37, 38. And some of what we're going to read, especially in working with others, is a result of the time period in which the book was written. So one of the things is, when it's talking about a lot of prejudice exists, don't start out as an evangelist or a reformer. Now, keep in mind, I think we've all gone through that phase or that period where we get this thing and the light comes on and it's like, wow, we have that spiritual awakening and we're filled with enthusiasm and we want to tell everyone. I don't think that's quite what we're talking about. During this time in history, the United States had just repealed the 18th Amendment. And the 18th Amendment was where the sale of alcohol was illegal in the United States. And that was actually a very, very hot button, hot topic issue. So the idea of whether alcohol should be legal or illegal, and if a law gets changed, that doesn't mean the debate ends. So that is the prejudice that it's talking about. And that is sort of the climate in which people would be doing 12-step work. So it's warning against that. that idea of like, hey, we don't want to make it seem like we're anti-alcohol or we're, for this part of the movement or that part of the movement. That's what it's suggesting. But I didn't know that, I wouldn't know that until I looked into it. So I just wanted to share. And it says ministers and doctors are competent and you can learn much from them if you wish. But it happens that because of your own drinking experience, you can be uniquely useful to other alcoholics because that's what we have to offer. And in many ways, that's the only thing I can offer. All I can offer is my experience. All I can offer is what I've done. And of course, I have to have experience, with alcoholism, but I also have to have experience with the spiritual awakening and experience with these 12 steps. And it's because we're able to say, yes, I've been there. Yes, I've done that. Yes, I've gone through what you've gone through. Yes, me too. We're able to punch through that denial that people like us so often have. So it says, so cooperate, never criticize. So we're not here to judge doctors or treatment centers or psychologists or psychiatrists. Cooperate. But our own experience is what makes us useful. And it says to be helpful is our only aim. And I love that because for me, again, it's a continuation of what I agreed in step 3. It's a continuation. It's a fulfillment of the third step decision that I made. I'm going to show up and be in love and service. I'm not going to show up and be the actor playing the director and force these people to get sober, although I did go through a phase of that. But I'm going to show up and simply try to be helpful. And that's the attitude. To be helpful is our only aim. All right, on page 90. When you discover a prospect for Alcoholics Anonymous, find out all you can about him. So what we're doing here is, welcome, we're on page 90. What we're doing here is, okay, we've got a prospect. We found one maybe from going to meetings as we would in kind of contemporary 12-step. Or maybe we found one from going to reaching out to do public information or H&I work, but we found someone. And also just something I want to throw out, and actually I was supposed to announce this. If you're able to sponsor, or you're looking for a sponsor, please utilize the chat to help get connected. Also, just something that I found in the last few years, there's a lot of recovery-based Facebook pages. And oftentimes on those Facebook pages, there's a lot of people that are reaching out and asking for help. And of course, I don't think Bill Wilson was like, yes, get on Instagram and get connected for the newcomers. But it's just, if I have that mindset of how can I help, I can take something like a Facebook group and use it as an opportunity to connect with others and to possibly find new people to work with. But what it's going to give us directions on what to do once we have somebody that we're willing to work with, or that is hopefully willing to work with us. And it says, when you discover a prospect for Alcoholics Anonymous, find out all you can about him. So that's a direction. If I've got somebody, get as much information about that person as I can. And this is important. If he does not want to stop drinking, don't waste time trying to persuade him. You may spoil a later opportunity. So if I'm approaching somebody and they don't want to quit drinking, they don't want to get sober, okay, no problem. If you change your mind, let me know. I'm here to help. And similarly, if I'm reaching out to somebody, they're like, yes, I want to sponsor. And I sit down with them and I explain what my responsibility is and what sponsorship looks like. And they're like, oh no, I don't want to do the steps. That's okay. When you do, let me know, right? That's my job. My job is to take you through this book, through these directions, so that you have help you have this experience. If you don't want to do it, don't waste time trying to convince them. I can't do the convincing. And I will say this, as we were talking before the meeting, how I can be very codependent. I try, you know what I mean? And I have tried. I've tried to convince people to do inventory or tried to convince them to do steps. That's not my job. That's not my job. You know whose job that is? That is alcoholism's job. That's not my job to convince people. I let alcoholism, I let addiction, I let their untreated illness do its work. And I show up with my hand out and this solution. And if they want it, I'm available. So this advice is given for his family also. They should be patient, realizing they are dealing with a sick person. And again, when we see sick or ill, I just know of some people who, when they hear sick, they think, twisted or bad or wrong. And no, what it's trying to say is we're dealing with people who are operating from a lot of pain. We're dealing with people who are hurting. We're dealing with people who are just not able to show up as their best selves. So let's show up with empathy, compassion, and understanding. And again, this solution. So if there is any indication he wants to stop, have a good talk with the person most interested in him, usually his wife. What I will say is nowadays, that's not really how I experience. I usually don't meet, a prospect through the family. I usually meet the prospect through the prospect because they're the ones that are at the meeting. So rarely would I say I'm talking with a spouse or a loved one trying to get information. So what does that look like in sort of more contemporary or modern? What it looks like is if somebody wants me to be their sponsor, what I always say is absolutely. Let's go for coffee or a virtual coffee, and let's talk about it. Let's have this conversation. And this is the conversation that it's going to describe. So get an idea of his behavior, his problems, his background, the seriousness of his condition, and his religious leaning. You need this information to put yourself in his place, to see how you would like him to approach you if the tables were turned. And the thrust of what it's saying there is seek to understand rather than to be understood. So not showing up with that all right, this is how it is. Listen to me. No. Have you been to 12-step before? Have you ever had a sponsor before? Have you done steps before? What steps did you do? Have you been in this book before? So yeah, what's been bringing you here? What's been causing you to reach out for help? What's been going on? Tell me about yourself. Do you have faith? Do you have a belief in God? Is that a barrier to you? Getting that information to see how we can be most helpful. So seeking to understand rather than to be understood. And it says sometimes it is wise to wait until he goes on a binge. The family may object to this, but unless he is in a dangerous physical condition, it's better to risk it. And what we're talking about there, some of the things that I love in working with others, we're going to see continue on. We're really beginning these themes that we're going to see in Two Wives and some of the, even in Two Employers. We're going to see these themes carry on. And what this theme is that's carrying on is one I think that we all know very intimately. The more hopeless I am, the better. The more I have burnt my life to the ground, the more willing I am to follow your suggestions. When I've got a plan, when I still have money in the bank, when I still got options, I don't know if I'm really desperate enough to do an inventory. And I also want to say sometimes that burning it to the ground has very little to do with the bank account or very little to do with my external circumstances. It oftentimes has everything to do with the falling apart on the inside, coming to the end of myself internally. And it's when I've come to the end of myself and my abilities and any ideas that I can come up with, and I'm beaten and I'm broken, that's when I'm willing to do that stuff I don't want to do. That's when I'm willing to take those actions I don't want to take. That's when I'm willing to try a new way of life. And so what gets me there is my alcoholism. So sometimes it's oftentimes actually when I work with people in so many ways, I talk about that window of willingness. When we come to 12-step, when we come to the rooms again, it'll be after a relapse or after, or go to treatment or go to detox. There's this little window of willingness that happens after we emerge remorseful, filled with that regret, that remorse, that shame. I'm such a piece of garbage, and I'm willing to take that action. And what I found is what I need to do is I need to take that action while the window is open, because that window will always close. It'll always close. If you don't, and some of you, I'm sure, know what I'm talking about from your own experience. And I talk about it with amends too. Like, I'll have that little window where I'm willing to make the amends. And if I don't make the amends, man, I will talk my way out of it. And that window will close, and I'll put it off and put it off and put it off. And the same thing happens when I come into recovery. I'm beaten and I'm broken just enough to be willing to do things. But man, that window does close. And so I want to get people and get them into the solution as quickly as possible to build that spiritual routine, to build that series of actions, because the window always closes. It always closes. And the hope is that we have enough of a connection with God by the time that it closes, that we're able to carry on, that we're able to continue, that we're able to begin to really have that spiritual experience, and God's keeping it open. So it's, and welcome to those that just joined. We're on page 90, about middle of the way down the page. All right. So it says, don't deal with him when he is very drunk, unless he is ugly and the family needs your help. Wait for the end of a spree, or at least a lucid interval. And just in my experience, if somebody is very, very intoxicated, very inebriated, there's not much I can do. If somebody's loaded, I don't have too many things that I can do. I can offer suggestions for detox. I can offer maybe a ride to detox. I don't drive, but I'll help coordinate a ride, possibly going to the hospital. But if somebody's active in their addiction, and especially if they're so drunk they're in a blackout, like, there's not too much I can do. And so I tend to not take a lot of too many phone calls when they're very, very, very drunk. But I do always follow up. I do follow up. And so it's wait until the end of the spree, because the spree will end, or at least a lucid interval, a moment where we can actually talk and have a conversation and see, hey, what are you open to? And then it says, let his family or friend ask him. In this case, why don't we ask? We can just ask the newcomer, or ask the prospect directly. Ask him if he wants to quit for good, and if he would go to any extreme to do so. And we see that is a question that's going to continue on. But we saw that question on page 58. Do you want what we have, and are you willing to go to any lengths to get it? Do you want to quit for good? And will you be willing to go to any extreme to do so? Those are two questions that are good to ask. Because here's the thing. If they don't want to quit, don't waste time. That's what it said on page 90. And if they're not, and to be fair, most people that I work with, they'll say, yes, I'm willing to go to any lengths, and then we'll see. But if they're willing to go to any lengths, that's when we're willing to go. Like, let's go. And if they're like, no, I don't really want to do steps, I just want to go to meetings. Okay, let me know if that changes, right? I get that information, get that gauge of their willingness. Because if they're not willing, they're not willing. And I'm just going to get resentful trying to make somebody do something that they're not willing to do. So it says, if he says yes, then his attention, so yes, he wants to quit for good, and yes, he's willing to go to any extreme. If he says yes, then his attention should be drawn to you as a person who has recovered. There's that word again. Again, not cured, but free from the mental obsession. The mental obsession has been relieved. I'm living in those 10-step promises, recovered. You should be described to him as one of a fellowship who, as a part of their own recovery, help others and will be glad to talk to him if he cares to see you. And of course, oftentimes, they know. But it is important to explain, at least in my experience, to explain, like, I'm working to my sponsees, I'm working with you because it helps me. And we're going to see that, truly, it helps us more than it helps them. And those who have been really active in sponsorship will nod their heads and be like, oh my gosh, yes, so true. But every sponsee that I've said that to before they've started working with others, they're like, I don't know about that, Paige. I don't think there's any way this is helping you more than it's, you know what I mean? They're just, it's experiential, right? We got to do it to believe it. Like so much of the stuff in this book, I got to do it to believe it. I can't wait to believe it to do it. So if he does not want to see you, and so keep in mind, we're given clear directions. If he doesn't want to get sober, leave him alone. If he wants to see you, describe this. If he doesn't want to see you, do this. So if he does not want to see you, never force yourself upon him. I don't know about you guys, but I know for me, whenever anyone told me you have to, that's not getting done. You know what I mean? Especially my family. Man, I had somebody it was after I got sick and I was dying with self-pity. I had someone say, Paige, you have to do a gratitude list. I didn't do one for years. I want you to, you know who suffered? Me. You know who was not grateful? Me. But you tell me I have to, man, I am going to rally against that. There is something in me that's like, don't you tell me what to do, you know? So we don't force ourselves upon them. It says, neither should the family hysterically plead with him to do anything, nor should they tell him much about you. They should wait for the end of his next drinking bout. You might place this book where he can see it in the interval. Here, no specific rule can be given. The family must decide these things. But urge them not to be over anxious, for that may spoil matters. Usually the family should not try to tell your story. When possible, avoid meeting a man through his family. Approach through a doctor or an institution is a better bet. And one of the things is like, why is it giving us this direction, right? And we're going to see that direction mirrored in the chapter 2 wives. We're going to see a lot of the suggestions that it's giving here on 90 and 91 mirrored in the chapter 2 wives. And the reason is it's what we talk about on page 18, right? It says highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. Strangely enough, wives, parents, intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and the doctor. So on page 18, it's reminding me that, like, what I have experienced, that if my family's giving me a suggestion, I don't want to hear it. If a non-alcoholic's giving me a suggestion, I don't want to hear it. If it's a doctor or a psychiatrist, I don't want to hear it, but I'll be polite about hearing it. You know what I mean? When it's family, I'm going to be a little rude. You know, I'm going to say some things I might need to amend. I'll definitely need to amend. I'll say things I'll definitely need to amend, right? But the italics on page 18. But the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with facts about himself, that I'm armed with the facts and the understanding of me, of what the allergy looks like in me, what the mental obsession looks like in me, and I'm armed with those things. Generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. So my experience is what can punch through that denial that people like me have, that no, you don't know, you don't understand, I'm different. I've done this too. I've done this too. It punches through that. So that's why it's saying, hey, you know, approaching through the family, they're going to associate it with the family. A doctor or psychiatrist is a better bet. That's a better way to kind of approach and get connected. Or in contemporary 12-step, modern 12-step, a meeting. A meeting is the perfect place to find people who want to recover. So it says, so back on page 91, it says, if your man needs hospitalization, he should have it, but not forcibly unless he is violent. Let the doctor, if you will, tell him he is, let the doctor, if you will, tell him he is something in the way of a solution. And so what it's saying is there are times where we need to go to detox, or even maybe we do need to go to treatment just to get some separation between us and the allergy, right? To get the substance out of our system, the alcohol or the drugs or whatever it is that brings us here out of our system, so that our mind is clear and we're not fighting that allergy. That's what it's saying. But again, not forcibly, not forcibly. And the asterisk if he's violent, there was different sort of, things about that. And actually, you know what, very, very much the modern equivalent is, and just my experience with sponsoring is, there are times where it's like, man, you're going to have a seizure. I can tell that you're going in withdrawals. Like, I really think it's best you go to the hospital or you go to a medical detox. And those are things often I strongly recommend, but I don't force them. And the only ever time when an ambulance or a welfare check is involved is when their life is at stake, or they're saying they're going to kill themselves and threatening and not following up with me. You know what I mean? So there are times where, yeah, sometimes a stronger authority than little old me needs to be brought in, but rarely. It's only if a life is in danger. I am of almost no authority. So. And I just love that, like, let the doctor, if he will, tell him he has something in the way of a solution. Now, most times I'm not meeting through the doctor, I'm meeting them face to face, so I can tell them we have a solution. Not, yeah, maybe, not keep coming back and something might happen. No, we have a solution and we have clear-cut directions. And this thing, if you do what I've done, it's very likely that this thing can happen for you too. There is a solution. And I'm carrying that message of depth and weight. So it says, when your man is better, what we mean is detox. We don't mean, cured or anything like that. When he's detox, the doctor might suggest a visit from you. Though you have talked with the family, leave them out of this first discussion. Under these conditions, your prospect will see he is under no pressure. He will feel that he can deal with you. He can deal with you without being nagged by his family. Call on him while he is still jittery. He may be more receptive when depressed. And in that paragraph, that paragraph is going to be a real theme that we're going to see in Two Wives. We're not going to pressure anyone into recovery. It doesn't work. Or at least, man, there are people who are probably better at it than me. What I'll say is I have tried. My codependent butt has tried. I have dragged people to detox. Now, this was before I was even like doing 12-step. This was just for me to alleviate my own guilt. But I would drag people to detox. You know how many of them stayed sober? None of them, not even me. I would try to, I probably belong in a lot more fellowships than I'm in. But I have tried to force people to get well. I've tried to make them do things. I am not successful. I'm sure have your own experience. You let me know if you're better at getting people to do things they don't want to do than I am, but I'm not successful at it. But when I reach out to people when they're in pain, when I reach out to people when they're hurting, when that window of willingness is open, and I'm saying, hey, if you want to do something, I'm more than happy to help you. If you want to go through these steps, I'm more than happy to help you. You don't have to, under no pressure. We have to decide for ourselves, and we get to decide for ourselves. And again, I don't know about you guys, maybe you all are more open-minded than I am, or than I was. If somebody forces me to do something, I'm gonna be, don't tell me what to do. And I'm pretty well guaranteed to do the exact opposite. Also, again, before the meeting, we were talking about ways to manipulate me into joining a home group. Just tell me that I'm needed. Ooh, I'll be there. Another one is to be like, don't do it, Paige. Ooh, I'll be out. Don't tell me what to do. I'm joining your home group. Just take notes on how to manipulate me. This is the section of that big book study. Helping. All right. And call on him while he's still jittery. He's maybe more receptive when depressed, when that window of willingness is open. And so now it's going to get into how we start laying down that foundation of step one. How do we start talking about, our illness? How do we start working with people? It says, see your man alone if possible. At first, engage in general conversation. After a while, turn the talk to some phase of drinking. Tell him enough about your drinking habits, symptoms, and experiences to encourage him to speak of himself. So starting to get that conversation going. This is, when we spoke about the cycle, we're going to really see this is where those examples from our own life of the cycle are going to be so useful. A time in my life where I've said, that's it, I'm never going to drink again. I'm never going to use again. I'm never going to pick up again. What that insane thought was. And then describing the allergy from our own experience. This is where it's going to be useful. Man, this is where war stories are helpful. It's not helpful in a meeting, but it can be helpful one-on-one if somebody's sharing one of theirs and I can match with one of mine. This is where it's helpful. And it says, if he wishes to talk, let him do so. You will thus get a better idea of how you ought to proceed. Again, I'm seeking to understand. How can I best help this person? How can I best lay down this simple kit of spiritual tools? How can I best offer my experience? How can I help? If he is not communicative, give him a sketch of your drinking career up to the time you quit, but say nothing for the moment of how that was accomplished. I will say, if we meet them in a meeting, they might have a general idea. They might not, to be fair. Sometimes you go to meetings and, when I was new, I'd go to meetings. I'm like, how do you get well? I didn't know, but they probably have an idea. And it says, if he is in a serious mood, dwell on the troubles liquor has caused you, being careful not to moralize or lecture. If his mood is light, tell him humorous stories of your escapades. Get him to tell some of his, right? So we're wanting to match that energy, seeing where they're at and meeting them where they're at, which isn't that what the book continues to do? Meet me where I'm at. And so I get to do that for others. So if somebody's kind of a little closed, walled off, okay, I'll talk about me. If they start, making jokes, let's make jokes. Let's tell, those funny stories. Let's, tell the ones about, the wet pants shenanigans. Like we'll tell that stuff. But if they're in a place of their pain, man, I just lost this and I broke my mother's heart and I lost this relationship. Okay, I did that too. And here's what that looked like for me. We're going to match that energy. And he says, when he sees you know all about the drinking game, meant to describe yourself as an alcoholic. Tell him how baffled you were, how you finally learned that you were sick. So we're starting to lay down that concept of what step one is really about. Give him an account of the struggles you made to stop. Show him the mental twist, which leads to the first drink of a spree. We suggest you do this as we have done in the chapter on alcoholism. If he's an alcoholic, he will understand you at once. He will match your mental inconsistencies with some of his own. And what this paragraph is telling us to do is to share those examples from our own life of the cycle, to share our examples from our own life of the mental obsession, that insane thought that I had when I was sober as I am today, and my alcoholism, my illness is untreated, and I get a thought that tells me this time will be different. Nobody will ever know. I'll go out for 3 drinks. I'll go out for 3 days. I'll only spend $300. I don't know why the number is 3 today. But tell him that. Tell him all the things that, like, all the things I did to try to put between me and the first drink, the first drug, the first whatever, and how none of them worked. Really getting into that cycle, getting into the mental obsession. When it's talking about, as we did on the chapter on alcoholism, that's the chapter more about alcoholism. And that chapter is focused very heavily on the mental obsession, because we want to really understand that, goodness, I will drink again. I will relapse. That's what we're after, trying to help them understand and have that step one experience. I will relapse. And anything that I try to put between me and that relapse, other than a spiritual experience, isn't going to work for long. And so we'll look at those experiences we have of putting this and that and this and that in front of that relapse. And inevitably we relapse. Inevitably that happened. Or sometimes, like I've had periods of sobriety where it wasn't a relapse, but it was so miserable and so awful that I had that thought that I need to kill myself. And I started, then to be fair, I had that thought most of my life, but I started to have a plan on how to kill myself. I talk about that too, because so many of us also relate to that. And so sharing that stuff, matching that energy. So it says, if you are satisfied he's a real alcoholic, well, how do I know if somebody's an alcoholic or not? Well, of course, they'll have examples from their own life of the cycle. We might have to kind of help them. Sometimes people don't understand. We got to explain what that mental obsession is, because it looks like to us that we didn't want it enough. It looks like to us that we weren't trying hard enough. It looks to us that we were weak. It looks to us that we didn't, and of course, that's what it looks to those around us. So once we explain it and share our examples, that should help. But also keeping it as simple as it needs to be. I can turn to page 44. The first paragraph of page 44. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. When you have honestly wanted to stop, did you stay stopped? Did you stay away from that relapse? No? Or, now I'm gonna tell you, I'm an and, but or, if when drinking, if when using, if whatever brings you to this study, you have little control over the amount you take. That physical allergy that once I start, I need more, and the more that I take, the more that I need to take. If I have that, probably alcoholic. If they relate to those, probably alcoholic. So that is what would satisfy me, right? If you are satisfied that he is a real alcoholic, begin to dwell on the hopeless feature of the malady. Dwell on that hopelessness. And for those that have been at this study a while, you'll notice I'm like hopeless, hopeless, hopeless. And we highlight and we look at all the times in this book, it talks about hopeless. And we'll see that hopeless is almost always mirrored with hope. But I've got to be hopeless before I'm willing. No worries. I'm so glad you came. Thanks for coming. Pew, pew. See, if you got questions, you throw them in chat. You throw anything into the chat. I'll get distracted, and I'm just glad you're here. That hopelessness. And I have to be in that place of hopelessness to be able to grab onto that hope. And so we're going to dwell on that hopelessness. And it says, show him from your own experience how the queer mental conditioning surrounding that first drink prevents the normal functioning of willpower. Show him from our own experience the mental obsession, those times where we said, I'm never going to do it again, and what those insane thoughts were. I got to get it out of my system. I'm being miserable to everyone in my life. I got to take a drink or two, take the edge off. It'll be nicer to everyone. You're welcome. What those insane thoughts were. My problem is this, but I can use that. My problem is tequila, but I can smoke crack like a lady. Those things that we're like, yeah, I get it. Nobody will know, like sharing those. And it says, and so that's what it's the queer mental conditioning surrounding the first drink, the mental obsession, and from our experience. And it says, don't at this stage refer to this book unless he has seen it and wishes to discuss it. I will say, if you're working with me, you've seen it, and I want to discuss it. So we will be discussing it. It's what it's trying to do is trying to just in the directions. It's like just having this be like a casual conversation. But we probably won't get to it today, but later on it's gonna tell the prospect to read this book. It's gonna tell the prospect, here's what you do. Go read this book and then decide whether you want to continue. And just what I found is a lot of people, including myself when I got here, I couldn't read this book on my own. And what I needed to do was read it with somebody. I needed it to come to places like this and learn to be, because I didn't, man, what the heck is a prosaic steel girder? I mean, what the heck is the queer mental conditioning surrounding the first drink? What are you talking? Like, I didn't know any of that. Like, it made no sense. Why do we care about the Wright brothers? Why do we care? Like, I didn't get it. I wasn't stupid. but I needed somebody who was properly armed with facts about themselves. So when I work with my sponsees, we do go through this book line by line, unless we have to expedite it a little bit. We work daily. We go through the book about an hour or two a day, going through line by line and relating our experiences. Hey, this is what it's talking about, this queer mental condition. Here's what it looks like for me. What does it look like for you? And so that's how I go through. And I'm just going to share that now because the tangent took me is why, because the tangent, my brain was like, oh, thought, and I went. So that's why. So it says, don't at this stage refer to this book unless he's seen it and wishes to discuss it. I want to talk about it, so we will. I'm just kidding. And be careful not to brand him as an alcoholic. Let him draw his own conclusions. And I think that is so important. I'm not going to tell you what you are. I'm going to tell you what I am, and I'm going to let you decide for yourself. If he sticks to the idea that he can still control his drinking. Now, again, whenever we see that word control, we're talking about the allergy, or lack of control is the allergy. So it's talking about, no, I think I can go out and have a few drinks. Okay. So if he sticks to the idea that he can control his drinking, tell him that possibly he can, if he's not too alcoholic, but insist that if he is severely afflicted, there may be little chance he can recover by himself. And sometimes, we get convinced that sometimes it's convinced, no, I can do it this time. But sometimes it's that, no, what I really need to do is this other thing, not these 12 steps. It's this, it's that. And so I can approach that in the same way. Oh, I just really need to work on my relationship and go to the gym, right? And I can say, possibly you can, if you are not as alcoholic as I am. I'll let you know. And I actually have experience with both those things. A relationship wasn't enough for me. And focusing on the relationship wasn't enough for me. I always drank again. I always relapsed. And man, there was a time in my life I was fit. This is a long time ago, but I had abs. You know what I mean? There was a time in my life. Those abs did not keep me abstinent. I thought of that pun just now. Abs could not keep me abstinent. It didn't work. Okay. I just do that to myself. And so share from my own experience. And then it's going to say, continue to speak. If he sticks to the idea that he can control his drinking, tell him possibly he can if he is not too alcoholic, but insist that if he is severely afflicted, there may be little chance he can recover by himself. Continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady. Absolutely. That's sobriety. I'll be so dry, even with the abs, So really emphasizing that this is an illness, that this is fatal, emphasizing it. Again, hopeless. Talk about the conditions of body. That's that physical allergy. Once I start, I can't control it and I need more. And the more that I take, the more that I need. And mind, which accompany it. The mind is that mental obsession. This time will be different. Nobody will ever know. Keep his attention focused mainly on your personal experience. Explain that many are doomed. Doomed is just another word for hopeless. As for those that are been around, I'm like, oh, it's like a supervillain word for hopeless. It's like Dr. Doom, right? Ooh, Dr. Hopeless, right? Doesn't have the same ring as Dr. Doom. So hopeless, who are doomed, who never realize their predicament. Doctors are rightly loath to tell alcoholic patients the whole story, unless it will serve some good purpose. So doctors, especially historically, didn't really want to tell people whether they were alcoholics because there was nothing they could offer. They didn't have a solution. They didn't have a way out. But it's going to say, but you may talk to him about the hopelessness of alcoholism because you offer a solution. You will soon have your friend admitting he has many, if not all, the traits of the alcoholic. If his own doctor is willing to tell him that he is alcoholic, so much the better. And it says, even though your protege may not have entirely admitted his condition, He's become very curious to know how you got well. And I know we're in the middle of the paragraph, but that's a great place to leave it, because and it's in the middle of the paragraph. That's where we're going to transition from laying down the foundation of step 1 to beginning to lay down the foundation of step 2 and what our solution is. So that's what we'll pick up and do next week. And thank you guys so much for being here. All righty.